10 years ago, Bruce Tognasini said, we need to get respect. And he was speaking, writing actually, about us, interaction designers. Back in the day, if you were at that party and someone asked you, what do you do for a living? You couldn't answer the question because we didn't have a title. That was the extent of the nothingness we were back in the day. And that's something that Bruce said, we have to work over this. We need to choose a title that works, and we need to start an association to support it. And that association is IXDA, the Interaction Design Association, which welcomes everyone and is a volunteering association to the extent that you're a member if you feel you're a member of it. That is, there are no entry fees, no tests. So, again, show of hands. 10 years after Bruce Tognasini's plea, who feels well respected? Don't be shy. Okay, some of you. Who feel respected on your profession? Okay, so the rest of you are the ones, I guess, that feel little respected. Very little. Okay. So, there's still a lot of work to do. And doctors and architects and engineers, professions that have a lot of respect, lawyers, well, not lawyers. Well, they are professions that have existed for centuries. So, well, perhaps it's just a matter of time. I don't know you, but I would like to get respect, the professional respect that enables me as a professional within my lifetime. So, how we do it? Well, my colleague and friend, Jose Ashona, I think he's there somewhere. Raise your hand. There. Nice guy. He's getting embarrassed. Thank you. Well, he thought that respect, the professional respect, can be thought of as having levels, maturity levels. And understanding this can help us to achieve increasing levels of respect until we get to the top of that staircase. So the base level is to respect the discipline. That means you're not going to get respected as a designer if you can't design. So that's like basic. Afterwards, there is a point where you can achieve the respect of colleagues, of peers. That is, our people who understand what you're doing. That's professional respect. And that not only has to do with those people accepting you as a peer, and that means, well, you're a designer. Now we know it because other designers say you're a designer. But also has to do with how you relate to other people. And it's interesting because of this model, we can understand that after college, all the other stairs of the respect staircase are based on dealing with people. People who understand you, people who then we can move to other people who doesn't necessarily understand you, but you need to work with in order to get results, like developers. Developers who think that perhaps design is about cosmetics, it's about opinions, it's about taste, and it's not something worthwhile. Then, after you find a way to get professional respect from developers mainly, that's the main case, and that means respect the designer, not that you're going to get respected by developers by programming something. because that's not getting respect as a designer. And actually, perhaps you're going to have some kind of conflict if you actually show some programmers that you can program better than them. That happened to me. That you don't want to have that kind of problems. So, after you find ways for those people to work on the same page, or you to work on the same page, or both of you actually finding space that you can work together, we can aim to get management respect. And managers are interested in things that are not actually the design itself, but the projects being on time and a lot of things that managers care about. And the reputation is on stake on any project. That is, you may think that the design is okay or not, but if the design is not on time, the manager is going to be responsible for that. And some managers are going to deal with that in different ways that we're going to see later. So after managers have our respect and we can work in a positive, productive way with different teams, well, we're going to get sponsors respect. Sponsors are the people who support the project. The definition is simple. If the sponsor says, I don't like this, how this is going, the project is doomed forever. The project doesn't exist anymore. Sponsors are the people who give projects the political and financial support to exist. So we can get to a level where sponsors will say, well, I want an interaction designer on this project because results are consistent, because this and this and that. Not just because I love the word or because I read it somewhere that this is a trendy new thing, but because it makes sense to have a designer and it doesn't make sense not to have one. And after we have successful projects working with all these levels, we can finally aim for universal respect. Universal respect is the term for the respect that doctors have. That is, if your mom is telling one of her friends that her son or daughter is an interaction designer, and the conversation goes which way? Well, if it goes like, wow, that's cool, I use this and this and that, or whatever kind of conversation your mom can have about having an interaction designer in the family, versus, well, my son/daughter works with computers. Interesting thing is that we can think of these 6 levels as being grouped on tiers of 2 levels each. And those tiers are like supporting structures for the whole thing. The first one is professionalism. And that starts from the beginning and never ends. The second one is leadership. And leadership doesn't mean to say, I'm a leader. Leadership is how you manage to get consistent results working with other people, especially if you're not in charge. And finally, there's entrepreneurism. That has to do with being able to bring with those skills, with that people, with that support, something new to the world. Something new on your own, like your project. And this has to do with a project that's sustainable, that is perhaps your own life project. It's not just a design project for others, or your own company, or your own career. Also, the last levels have to do with understanding business. We are not going to get sponsors' respect without making sustainable decisions. If you're going to fight with people that's working on projects because we think that this is not perfect, for instance, and we are not aiming for excellence, but something achievable, and we are, I don't know, being problematic for managers, well, that's not going to happen. We have to understand business in order to actually get to the top of this scale. So, today I want to talk about 4 concepts for each one of these tires that may inspire you, that you can look for more information online, that may open you some doors, like the ones I found open, knowing something I didn't know before. And also, I will talk about a process to make all of this work. So, let's start with professionalism. Professionalism starts, well, with college, becoming a designer. And these two levels are the shift from dealing with artifacts to dealing with people. The first concept I want to give you is that there is a huge difference in the acceptance criteria on these levels. Okay? Like the technical level at college, for instance, has to do with the approval of a superior, with someone saying you that this is right or this is wrong. Do it again. That's usually in college. That criteria can be about a person giving you the okay, or that person can be codified in a book or some other artifact, but nonetheless is someone saying that this is right, this is wrong. Professional acceptance criteria, instead, has to do with being able to define and satisfy a commitment, a contract. Has to do with being able, once you have all the details managed on the technical level, to be able to actually say, well, we are going to do this, not this, because of this or that, and be able to actually do that the other person agreed with you that is what they want. The second concept of this level is about communication, about professional communication. Here, communication is not about saying things. It's not about opening our mouths or firing up an email. It's about the kind of communication that articulates people in order to follow actions. And turn off the lights. They're begging for you to turn off the lights. So, this graph that I will just tell you about because you can see it. Well, there are two dimensions here. One is the people who is involved in the communication, in the conversation, whatever. Those are the other party and we. So, when the ball is on that side of the park, it's about listening. When the ball is on our side, it's time to speak. And it's important to understand that this has to be mastered on both levels, that you should listen as well as you're able to speak. That's communication. I think that Randall, the guy from KCD, said that the people who think they are good at communication, but people don't understand them, well, they don't understand what communication is about. So, the other level is about what's being said about, what's being talked about. It can be concepts, or it can be feelings, and usually those feelings are about the relationship, about how you or the other part feel about what's going on. And you have to tend to all those things in order for communication to actually go on productively. That is, you have to empathize, that is, being aware of the other's concerns and feelings about the relationship, about the project, and you have to be able to actually express your own. One thing that I found out is that we designers think that words, thank you, are not our media. And again, this is not about being a designer. This is about dealing with people. This is about, after we are good at design, like a technical thing, we have to reach other people and coordinate actions with them. So this is not about being Hemingway, this is about being productive. One of the things that we designers also are not very well at dealing with is the project management. And that is perhaps related to the fact that designers, at least the ones I know, at least my education was like that, and of several colleagues I have. On college, you have to follow impossible deadlines, doing things that you never did before, and a lot of pressure, several days without sleeping. Well, that's not sustainable. That's not a sustainable way to work, especially if you're working with other people, and that's going to bring a lot of trouble in the project, the relationship, etc. So a project has three sides. This is called the triple constraint. And one of the reasons it's a triangle is perhaps because it's the most complex shape a project manager can deal with. So, well, the thing is, there are three variables: cost, scope, and schedule. Cost is easy, is how much the resources, including your time, will cost. The other two, well, schedule is the project going to be on time, on the time when the deadlines are defined, etc. And finally, scope has to do with the things that you said you are going to do. Well, that's the tricky part for us designers, because actually our job is to define scope. So that's the point where we have to understand this in the first place, to understand, well, how do I define my scope? Perhaps by complexity. Like, I will do, I don't know, like the details, but, well, this, and be able to translate that into everyday awareness of if this is going more or less that way or not, and the project is changing, something that will always happen. The point is, you can't touch any of those variables without affecting the whole thing. You can't just say, well, the scope has changed. Well, but then the other two variables have to change as well. That's why it's a triangle. And if you don't have this awareness, what happens is that at the end, you become aware of all the work, the extra work that you didn't think about, that now you have to do because you didn't speak on time to warn the project manager or the client, if that's the kind of relationship you have, that this is not going as planned. And this is frequent. And the last concept here on the professionalism has to do with not getting attached to design decisions. How to do that? Because it's like, well, don't breathe for like 10 minutes. It's very difficult when you're like, when you have this relationship with design that is like your son, and you want the best for your son, and you care for your son, and then everyone says that your son is ugly, or misbehaves, or eats crayons at the school, or whatever. So, one way to do it is to try different options and actually involve the other parts in the conversation. I discovered that some years ago when, as it happens, the client wanted to take over design decisions and said, this goes here. And then, well, okay, that goes here. Well, but that didn't work. So the client said, no, I want this here. So in order to stop that, why don't we try all the possibilities that a design can have on certain dimensions and say, well, this is a space that we can deal with, and let's work together on picking up the best option, considering all the other constraints, like business constraints or other constraints. It happens that when you do this, you're not attached to the decisions, you're involved in the other part in the conversation, and perhaps by showing the other parts, other possibilities, they can understand the difference and actually understand what they want and what they don't want or don't need, instead of just firing up their imagination and saying something that later is not going to work. And you're going to say, but you told me to do so and stuff. Second tier, leadership. And this has to do with, again, being able to bring results with others, especially with people who doesn't come from the same background as you. Well, one thing that helped me is to speak the same language, because if you don't, it's very hard to actually get understood. And Andres Rodriguez, a colleague of us in La Plata, has been working with a group with a unified process. It's a very strict process from engineering. And he understood that if he wanted for design to happen on that project, he had to understand first all the things that we're working on, all the methodology, all the distinctions, everything, and then sneaking design into that process in a way that works. So what he did was take the white roles that are the standard roles defined in the methodology. That is sponsor, that's the first one. The analyst or architect, that's the second one. The developer, that's the third one. And the last one is the tester. And those are development roles. So what he did was to say that in order to bring UX, you have to bring a new dimension, but not that different in hierarchy. That is, sponsors or stakeholders that are the only other part specified in the methodology have to be split into, well, 4 roles. That's the actual user, the real users that will use the thing. The user voice, that's usually the user's boss. That is, in projects that are for internal projects, for companies, for state. There are people who are going to use the software, and there are their bosses that have the idea of how that should work. But there are 2 different realms because they are not going to use the software. You have also the sponsor. That's the guy that's in charge of the political and economical support of a project. And you have the domain leader. The domain leader is the person who knows a lot of technical things about the business itself, the business problem that's being solved. Let's say you are working in a project for medical software, so there's going to be a consultant, a medical consultant, in order to make a lot of decisions, provide a lot of information. But again, that person is not going to use the software. Again, that person is going to be so into the process that isn't actually useful for usability testing. So that's a different role. On the team side, what Andres did was to put the architect or the analyst next to the UX specialist, UX leader, interaction design senior, whatever you want to call it. Okay? Why? Because the design decisions that that position can make can impact the software in such a level that have to be dealt with since the beginning. For instance, an undo function. You can't just add an undo function after the project is defined. Like after all the architecture from the system perspective is defined. You have to do that from the day before the code is going to start its space. The developer has appeared as the UI designer. And another thing is that on this distinction, that means that also some decisions have to be taken together, or who is speaking with who. And finally, the tester on the systems, on the engineering team, is paired with a UX tester. Actually, this is a usability tester, but it made more sense to Andres to say, well, it's UX tester, because we are bringing UX. So it was easier for the people who was working with to understand these roles with those names than other options. On any project, the roles may change, the structure may change, methodology may be different, and it's our responsibility, if we want to get respected, if we want to be respected on this leadership tier, to understand how a team works, and moreover, how team works before us, how software has been written the last 20 years, 30 years, before we came here and say, well, let's do this differently, and the other part of the equation will be asking why, because we say so. No. The other distinction, the other concept that's important on this level is to keep the problems out of the relationship, because sometimes it's easy to think that the other person has a problem. The person that's bringing the problem or whatever, it's like the other person has a problem. And if we deal with it that way, well, we're going to confront the person because that person is, well, part of the problem. Another way of dealing with this is to think that actually the problem is there, and we are here as pairs to solve it. So that's one way to deal with the fact that many times we're like having different opinions, and if we think that those opinions are not something for us to hold, but are like different visions of something that's outside the relationship, and the relationship is going to be about solving that problem and having opinions, but about that. It's not my opinion, it's how I see that, how I understand that. Well, that's going to work a lot better. That also has to do with something called the Pygmalion effect. That is, that our expectations influence how people deal with us. That is, if I think that the other people, since the beginning, if I state my relationship unconsciously, thinking that the other people is going to be defensive, to be difficult, that they are going to be a menace to my process all the time, it's very probable that that will influence their perception of us and therefore their actions, and will put them on that way. Instead, if we think of them as partners, and if we deal with them as partners, it's more probable that actually we will have a productive professional relationship. One important part of dealing with people, of defining commitments, of negotiation, has to do with knowing how to say no in a respectful way. And that's one of the hardest parts of all that universe. William Ury wrote The Power of a Positive No. It's a very interesting book. He's a negotiator. And he says that if we just say no, we are, well, being confrontational to the other person. Instead, he proposes another method that works very well, that has three phases. The first phase is a yes. Is yes affirming our principles, is stating our principles, having our principles clear. It's very difficult to have a position with someone if you don't have a clear position yourself in the first place. The first step is saying yes, affirming your principles. The second step is that because of those principles, we can't accept an ill-defined commitment, an ill-defined proposition, and we refuse that, we decline that, let us say, in a respectful way. And the third part is, well, saying yes to the relationship and yes to another alternative that will work better for mutual benefit. If we don't have a yes after our no, we're just a rock in the way. We are just being a problem. If you say, well, because of this, we can't do this. This won't work as well, so let's do this. That's a way to establish also limits. And establishing limits is a thing that we designers, we interaction designers should do, because there are many confusions about what we do and what we don't. The fact that we can do some things doesn't mean it's part of our duty. And sometimes we accept some things that, well, will keep us doing those things over and over without actually being able to start doing interaction design. And finally, there is an interesting model from a book called Dealing with Difficult People. And I should say that these are very complex concepts, and again, this isn't just something you read and it's done. As professionalism, this doesn't end. I found this book very interesting. It says that when you have some persons that are like locked on a position, it's perhaps because they are trying to defend something that's valuable for them, and they can't find a way to do it productively in the relationships. They say that in the same way that some persons bring out the worst of us, we can be the persons that bring out the best of others. That's interesting. The idea is that there is a normal zone, a productive zone, that's a balance. And perhaps you go today more to one side than the other, but there's a zone where collaboration is possible between being focused on the relationship and being focused on results. Also, these sides have poles. One pole is to be aggressive, and one other pole is to be passive. So, what's to be passive about results is not doing something because you're not sure what to do or that your plan is the best possible plan. So, you take your time to understand things, to compare options. That's being passive about results. Being aggressive about results is what the authors call the tank. It's like, this has to be done now. Everyone else is just delaying me. It's just a nuisance. It's an obstacle. Being passive to relationships is, well, for instance, saying yes to everything because you don't want to get people upset. Well, they will get upset later when you don't satisfy the yes you gave before. Like, yes, I'm going to do this. Yes, yes, yes. And then you're not doing that because that's not possible. It's not possible to say yes to everything. And the people who's locked on one of these extremes, like the yes person that looks to get along, when that person has a problem, when that person has this conflict because they said yes to something that they didn't do, they say yes again. So any conflicting person is locked on one of those sides, and we can help to get them again to the center. Well, I was about to forget that, well, the last one is the one that is aggressive about relationships. And that is about getting appreciation. That's about me, 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 me. That's being aggressive about relationships. So again, we can understand where these people come from, what they are trying to protect, and working with them in getting them back to the center, to the place where we can work together. Most interestingly, this book has like several steps for each one of the personas that correspond to these behaviors. And the amazing thing that, as I read it over and over, even on meetings, it's like, that guy is a problem. Let's see what's the recipe to deal with this. The first step isn't slapping them on the face. And I say, well, the following step should be. No, the following step isn't slapping people in the face either. It's very creative, and it works. And entrepreneurship, that is about bringing something new to the world and being involved with that. It's not just a project. It's about what you want to do with your life. Well, the first thing is to set a vision for business, for an association, for ourselves. And a vision is as simple as this. It's about closing our eyes and say, well, what will be the perfect world? The world I would like to live in. Then, to subtract the world that we have, that is, open our eyes and say, well, okay, that's not the perfect world. And what's left is the work that we have to do. For instance, for our professional respect, what should be the perfect world? The world we want to have, like a world where interaction design is taught as colleges instead of us trying to sneak into university and giving a class or something. A world where interaction designers are enabled to do interaction design. A world where interaction designers are on pay and respect and responsibilities to others that have the same experience but are working on different fields, like engineers. Well, close your eyes and ask yourself, what world do you want to live in? And then you can understand the work that you have to do is going to be a proposal, an offer, the company or whatever you have to build. So it's good to understand that going to have a who, a person that is going to talk to, that is going to address. Also, following that, we can think about what are we going to do for that person, what's our offer, and finally, how are we going to do it? And I will read the IXDA mission that has these three parts. IXDA mission says, we believe that the human condition is increasingly challenged by poor experiences. That's the who. That's the who are we, who has the problem we want to solve? Well, we want to solve the human conditions problem. It's not that IXDA is a professional or just a professional association talking to professionals. We want to actually solve a human problem. IXDA intends to improve the human condition by advancing the discipline of interaction design. That's the what. What are we going to do for the who? To do this, we foster a community of people that choose to come together to support this intention. And that's the how. When establishing this kind of visions, of plans, we have to also understand how to deal with people and how to manage people, because we're going to relate to people in different ways. There are three basic management styles. One is what Joel Spolsky calls the command and control. It's about giving people orders. That works when the order is specific, like charge. Charge is a basic order that thousands of soldiers can comply with. But innovate is not an order. It's so easy to follow. So that doesn't work. Econ 101 is the name he gives to a style of management based on incentives, economical incentives, money. And the problem with that is that it corrupts people. It takes out their own motivation to do things and replaces that motivation with the motivation to earn more money. And sometimes they do the things that you don't want to do because those things are going to give them more money. And finally, there's the intrinsic motivation style of management, the identity management, that is about understanding what people want to do, giving them an objective that sounds with their lives. Also has to do with picking people who has that kind of commitment, and giving them an atmosphere, the right environment to develop that vision. Finally, the last concept I want to give you for entrepreneurship is about the cycle of interaction with clients. This is something I learned from Juan Carlos Lucas. He's a coach, and he has several years doing this. He says that the first thing we have is an offer from the supplier. The following thing, if that offer is accepted, is, well, the actions, the project itself, the realization. So far, the power is on the provider, on the supplier's side, is our side. And this is a side we're comfortable with. We're comfortable with imagining something to some plan, offering it, and with doing it, with execution. The next two steps are usually not thought about because they are out of our control. They have to do with assurance, that is, to make sure that the client is satisfied on time with the artifacts we built. And finally, prepare, that is, to listen and to understand what we are doing wrong or what we can do better. And here, it's interesting to understand, of all the other roles we have to interact with, like programmers, what we're doing that it's driving them nuts. For instance, our way of finding opportunities of diverging the project perhaps is making them anxious, and perhaps it's one of the things that we can find out how to deal with, not to repress, but how to work out in a way that actually works for both parts. So, the last thing is the power cycle that will power all this on all these levels. And basically, we can understand that we can design our career with the same frame, of mind that we use for designing artifacts. That is, having ideas, building or doing something, testing them, and with that information, learning and go again. And that has a lot to do with what projecting our lives means. On that path, there will be individual efforts and also collective efforts. We may learn our way with some projects, some people, some interactions, but we cannot cover the whole spectrum. Other colleagues can also be doing their own process, their own research, their own learning. And we can gather together and learn from each other and understand a lot of things that we could have not have the opportunity to understand just on our own, with our own experiences. And that's what IXDA is for. That's what this network that I talked about before on the mission, the individuals that want to foster this vision, has to do with. There are local groups around the world. Here in Brazil, there are like more than 20 local groups. And those are the places where you can find pairs to talk with. If they're not meeting, you can ask them, well, let's have a meeting next week or the week after that one. 15 days is a good time spent to plan things. Let's meet again, let's talk, let's exchange experiences. And if your city doesn't have a local group, you can apply for one on ixda.org/local. Because that is the way, that is one of the tools, or the most important tool we have to build that respect that we want for other professions and ultimately from the world. So, thank you very much.